The stars never looked so far away, not when we first reached for them. We were told again and again that we didn't belong out there. Not by our own kind. No, humans believed in themselves even when everything else crumbled. But the galaxy? The galaxy looked at us and laughed. We didn't have claws sharp enough, skin thick enough. Our minds weren't linked to a hive. We couldn't bend light or move objects with thought. We were soft, scattered, loud. So loud. That's what they always said. We were too emotional. Too violent. Too unpredictable. A mistake. One that should have never climbed down from the trees, let alone crawl into the void of space. They didn't say it with anger. That would have made it easier. No, they said it like a fact. Like gravity. Like death. We were tolerated. Watched from a distance like wild things that might bite if poked too hard. And when we asked for a seat at the table, at their so-called galactic assembly, they smiled. That kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. The kind that told us we were being humored. Our first request was denied. So was the second. The third wasn't even acknowledged. You haven't earned your place, they said. You haven't suffered enough. You haven't sacrificed enough. You haven't contributed anything valuable. The ambassador's hands shook when she came back. Her voice broke halfway through the report, and still she read every word. Every insult. Every dismissal. No one interrupted. Not a soul. We listened. We absorbed it. And then we built. We stopped asking. We stopped knocking on their doors and begging for scraps of recognition. We turned our backs on their sprawling cities of crystal and light, their civilizations that had lasted eons before we'd even lit our first fire. We returned to the cold side of our moon, to the cracked hulls of ships that still smelled of oil and desperation, and we worked. We took what little tech they hadn't banned us from using and we made it ours. Not elegant. Not smooth. Not perfect. But it worked. We didn't have antimatter reactors, so we made fusion scream. We didn't have gravity wells, so we bent space with raw energy until it bent the way we needed. We didn't have the resources, so we recycled everything: air, waste, emotion. We turned grief into fuel. Anger into motion. Hope into thrust. The first human-built dreadnought wasn't beautiful. It was terrifying. Thick-plated. Loud. Pulsing with red-hot energy like a heart that refused to stop beating. It moved like a wounded animal. But it moved. And when we turned its engines toward the stars for the first time in a long time, no one laughed. They called it madness. Suicide. Proof of our instability. They didn't stop us. They just watched. Watched us build. Watched us launch. Watched us land on dead rocks and frozen moons and claim them as our own. Watched as we carved names into soil that had never felt life. Not all of us made it. The first colony ship to reach Epsilon Kira cracked open on landing. Radiation leaks. Fire. Screams. And yet, when rescue vessels arrived weeks later, they found something they couldn't explain. Survivors. Barely alive, yes. But alive. Huddled in what was left of the engine bay, wrapped in sheets of emergency foil and soaked in ash, they looked up at the alien rescuers and said the words that echoed across the assembly for decades. We're not leaving. The words were small. But they hit like a punch. That's when they started to get nervous. Not because we were strong. Not because we were smart. But because we were stubborn. You tell a human they can't do something, and you just gave them a reason to try. They shut down trade routes. They refused to sell us medical nanites, denied us access to terraforming drones. 100 small cuts, each meant to starve our reach. But it only sharpened our edges. One by one, the old nations of Earth funneled their last resources into the stars. It wasn't a united front, not at first. But there was a common thread. Never again would we ask for permission. On the outer edge of known space, past the burnt remains of the Davin Rift, was a planet no one wanted. Too far from supply lines. Too unstable for safe landing. Tectonic plates that hadn't stopped grinding in centuries. The local fauna had a taste for flesh and metal. We named it Homefire. And we made it ours. They said it was uninhabitable. We disagreed. We bled in that soil. We burned under those twin suns until our skin peeled. We built shelters that collapsed and rebuilt them stronger. We adapted. We didn't wait for the galaxy to give us tools. We made our own. Children were born on Homefire. Their first steps weren't taken on soft ground, but on reinforced steel plating. Their first words weren't just mama or dada, but pressure stable and oxygen nominal. Their lullabies were the hum of generators and the thrum of seismic monitors warning of yet another quake. They didn't fear the stars. They looked up and saw challenge. By the time the assembly decided to investigate, it was too late. We weren't asking to join anymore. We were expanding. Mining. Establishing jump relays. Setting up our own beacons. We didn't come with flags or speeches. We came with calloused hands and eyes that had seen too much. The first contact ship from the Greth Consortium arrived in orbit above Homefire with a simple demand: cease all expansion until proper authorization could be processed. We ignored it. They sent another. This time with weapons primed. And that's when they saw it, our fleet. They expected half-broken frigates and glorified cargo ships. What they got were warborne vessels bristling with kinetic launchers and hulls scarred from asteroid storms we'd crossed without asking for maps. Our ships didn't look sleek. They looked mean. And they were. The Greth ship turned back. Quietly. No messages. No threats. A week later, the Galactic Assembly released a statement declaring humanity's actions reckless and borderline unlawful. But they didn't stop us. They didn't try to stop us. But someone else did. That's when the disappearances began. First, the science vessel Curiosity vanished while studying dark matter anomalies near the Veil. No distress signal. No debris. Just gone. Then the freighter Stone Moth, 3 jumps from Earth's furthest colony, failed to check in. All 142 crew lost. No sign. No trace. We looked inward. Wondered if maybe the strain had broken something inside us. If maybe we were the ones pushing too far, too fast. Until the Nightingale came back. Barely. The ship limped into orbit over Titan's Edge station with a shattered engine array and half its crew dead from vacuum exposure. The captain was in critical condition, but before she slipped into a coma, she managed one word. Ambush. That changed everything. We weren't alone in the dark. Not just watching eyes anymore. But claws. Malice. Whoever they were, they didn't want to negotiate. They didn't want to be seen. They wanted us gone. And we weren't going anywhere. We started fortifying outposts, arming freighters, retrofitting research vessels with weapons. The assembly warned us against escalation, said we were provoking unknown species, that we were escalating tensions in a delicate ecosystem of peace. They didn't understand. We'd already seen the ecosystem. It didn't want us, and it didn't matter. We weren't leaving. We had already written our names into the dirt of a dozen worlds. Already built families under skies that had never known laughter before we arrived. Already made promises to those who died to get us this far. This wasn't about pride anymore. It was about survival. About proving not to the galaxy, but to ourselves, that we were more than what they said we were. More than flesh and noise. More than an accident of evolution. We were human. And that meant something. Even now, as I record this from the command deck of the Resolve, heading straight into the unknown where 3 of our ships have already vanished, I feel no fear. Only the hum of the engines. The steady blink of shields holding. The crew silent, focused. They think this is the end. Maybe it is. But if we die here in the dark facing the storm. Not crawling back. Not asking. And not alone. Because somewhere out there, just past the edge of where the maps end, something is watching us. Hunting us. Testing us. They think we'll break. They think we'll give up. They said we didn't belong in space. We disagreed. And now we're about to show them why. Asterisk transmission cut. Static. Alarms echo. Lights flicker. Asterisk. A single voice comes through, cracked and shaking. They found us. The alarms didn't stop. They howled through the hull like dying wolves, every pulse drilling into the skulls of those who hadn't slept in hours. Red lights bathed the corridor, casting long shadows of crew members bolting to their stations. Boots pounded on metal. Hands gripped support rails as gravity hiccuped from the strain of emergency power rerouting through failing systems. Someone screamed. No one stopped to help. Not because they didn't care, but because they couldn't. Not now. Not with them out there. The bridge of the Resolve was chaos, but trained chaos. No one waited for orders to breathe. They knew the drills. They'd practiced for every known threat. Rogue asteroids, radiation bursts, electrical surges, pirate skirmishes. This wasn't any of those. This was different. A static blur twisted the main view screen. Interference danced across the signal like insects chewing through wires. Sensors flickered, then died. Auto-targeting showed empty space. But every fiber of every body on that deck screamed that something was there. Watching. The captain had blood running down his cheek from where a pipe burst above him. He hadn't noticed. He just stared at the main screen like it owed him an answer. Still nothing on thermal, someone said. It's like they're invisible. They're not, came another voice, lower, steadier. They just know how to hide better than we know how to look. The crewman who said it was young. Maybe too young to be out here on the edge of nothing. But he had seen more than most, twice his age. He'd been aboard the Nightingale before it limped back to Titan's Edge. He was one of the few who made it back. He didn't talk much after that. But now, as he stared into the static, he looked like he'd been waiting for this moment to come again. Another jolt slammed through the ship. Everyone grabbed something. Sparks leapt from a control panel and seared the fingertips of the woman closest to it. She hissed, bit her lip, and kept typing. "Shields down to 42%, someone yelled. "They're not firing," said the captain, voice rough. "They're just pushing. Testing us," the young crewman whispered. That word hung there. Cold. Empty. The lights flickered again. Then something shifted in the static. Not an object. Not really. More like a shadow behind a curtain. A shape maybe. Or the suggestion of one. Just enough to make your mind try to fill in the blanks. It looked wrong. The captain leaned forward. "Enhance. Frame by frame." "No good, sir. They're interfering with the feed directly. It's not just jamming. It's rewriting what we see. Rewriting. Whoever, or whatever, was out there didn't just know how to hide. They knew how we saw. How we thought." The silence in that room became a presence of its own. Then came the voice. Not through comms. Not through external speakers. Through the hall. Every metal panel, every loose screw, every floor tile began to vibrate in rhythm. It wasn't words, not at first. Just pressure. Like a breath being held behind steel lungs. Then it spoke. Asterisk, "You were warned." Asterisk. 3 words. Simple. But they carried weight. No language translator needed. It went straight past sound and meaning. It burrowed into the gut. One woman dropped to her knees, clutching her ears even though there was nothing to hear. Another just backed into a wall, mumbling something over and over again about not being ready. "We don't have records of this voice," someone stammered. "It's not in the database. It's not one of the known species." "Of course it isn't," the young crewman said, eyes locked on the screen. He wasn't blinking. "They were always watching," he whispered. "Long before we saw the stars." The captain turned slowly. "What did you say?" "I saw them, sir. On the Nightingale. They weren't ships. They weren't even alive, not like we are. It was like space itself hated us. Like it was folding in just to crush us." He didn't sound scared. Not anymore. He sounded like someone finally being believed. The static pulsed. The voice came again. Asterisk, "You are not welcome. You were never welcome." Asterisk. A panel exploded at the back of the bridge. Flames licked the ceiling. Someone screamed again. Still, the captain didn't move. "What do you want?" he asked, voice cracking. The screen glitched hard. For a moment, everyone saw it, an eye. Vast. Lidless. Made not of flesh but of darkness and light twisting in unnatural patterns. No one could tell if it was real or just something the mind tried to see in the chaos. But they all saw it. Then the signal vanished completely. Silence. No static. No alarms. Just silence. Everyone on the bridge looked at each other, not sure if it was over, or if the real storm was just beginning. Then the main screen flickered back to life. A single feed. One of their own camera drones, positioned outside the hall. It was spinning, tumbling slowly. The image it sent back showed the Resolve floating still, and behind it, dozens of shapes. Not ships. Not planets. Forms. Some massive. Some small. Some moving in and out of sight like smoke through water. They didn't look like anything that should exist. No symmetry. No biology. No technology. Just presence. Like nightmares made real. "We're surrounded," someone whispered. The captain just stared. "No. We're being studied." One of the crew tapped furiously at her console. "I'm getting long-range telemetry. Other ships, they're going dark. Not destroyed. Just silenced." Across the galaxy, other human ships had reported strange sightings. Ghost signals. Ships drifting off course. Crews vanishing. Until now, everyone thought it was pirates, freak space weather, maybe even mechanical error. But they were wrong. This was organized, coordinated, and patient. These things had waited until we were just far enough from help. Just confident enough in ourselves. Just blind enough to not notice them closing in. "We should have listened," someone said, voice shaking. "No," the captain said. "We should have prepared." Then more quietly he added, "And we still can." The crew turned toward him. He stood. Wiped blood from his face. Looked them all in the eye. "We didn't build this ship to run. We didn't come this far to turn around. If they want us gone, they're going to have to make us disappear. And if that's how this ends, fine. But they'll remember what we did first. No one moved at first. Then one by one they turned back to their stations. No more panic. Just purpose. Somewhere out there, on every colony, every mining station, every ship drifting between stars, humans were seeing the same things. Feeling the same pressure. The galaxy didn't want us. But we were there anyway. On home fire, sensors detected faint signals at the edge of the system. The atmosphere shimmered unnaturally. Crops wilted under a sun that hadn't changed. The governor ordered all civilian comms locked down. Not to hide the truth, but to prepare for it. On Earth, astronomers watching deep space telescopes saw strange gaps in background radiation, like shadows with no sources. The moon base picked up fragments of signals that resembled no known language. People began whispering in bunkers, in labs, in outposts. They're here. But no one gave up. We were scared. Of course we were. Only a fool wouldn't be. But behind that fear was something deeper. Anger. Not blind rage. Not hate. Righteous anger. Because we had tried to do it right. We had asked. We had waited. We had fought for every inch we claimed, every ounce of progress we made. And still they came to erase us. So now we would fight back. Even if it meant fighting shadows. Fighting ideas. Fighting whatever had decided the stars didn't belong to us. The resolve powered back to life. No enemy ships in sight. No missiles. No boarding pods. Just presence. Pressure. Watching. And a message blinking on every console. 4 words. Live. Or be removed. Asterisk asterisk. The captain read it. Then smiled. Let's see them try. And then. The lights died again. But this time it wasn't from damage. It was them. They were inside. Not physically. Not in the halls. But in the systems. In the fabric of what the ship was. The AI core flickered. Power rerouted itself without command. Navigation shut down. Communications stopped responding. Manual override, someone shouted. Not working. Then another voice, choked, terrified, came from engineering. They're talking through the ship. The captain tapped into internal comms. A strange hum echoed through the line. Then a voice, twisted, echoed, familiar and not. Asterisk, your machines are children. Your minds are noise. This is not your place. Asterisk. The captain leaned into the mic. You don't get to decide that. There was silence. Then. Asterisk, we already have. Asterisk. And then the hull groaned. From the outside nothing moved. From the inside, everything bent. Reality just slightly twisted at the edges. Shapes crawled along walls that weren't there a second before. Time slowed. Words stretched. People screamed without sound. One crewman collapsed, eyes wide, blood running from his nose. Another started laughing and didn't stop. But the young survivor from the Nightingale stayed calm. I know what this is, he said. I saw it before. It's not death. It's a test. A test of what? The captain asked. He didn't answer. He just walked to the central console. Placed his hand on the panel. Closed his eyes. And the ship responded. For a moment the twisting stopped. Systems flickered back to life. Gravity returned to normal. The presence pulled back. Everyone stared. What did you do? Someone asked. I remembered, he said, voice low. I remembered what they showed me. What they wanted me to forget. The captain stepped toward him. What did you see? But before he could answer, the hull groaned again. Harder. And this time something touched the ship. Every sensor lit up. And just before the signal died completely, one last image burned itself into the main screen. A shape. Massive. Impossible. Orbiting just above them. Not a ship. Not a station. Not anything we could ever build. It looked like a mouth. And it was opening. The ground trembled again. Not like before. This time it felt deeper, like something far below was shifting, waking up. Dust drifted from the ceiling of the outpost bunker, and the emergency lights flickered as if even they weren't sure what was coming next. No one spoke for a few seconds. They just looked at each other, wide-eyed, holding their breath. One of the techs, a younger man with shaking hands, pressed a finger to his earpiece and tried again to get a signal out. Static. The kind of static that didn't feel accidental. The kind that meant something was jamming them, intentionally. Outside the wind had stopped. Not slowed, stopped completely. Like the whole planet was holding still. The lead officer, a woman with deep lines around her eyes, kept staring at the central monitor. Something's still out there, she muttered almost to herself. It's not done. She wasn't wrong. The satellite feeds were showing something odd, something impossible. The object that had dropped from orbit wasn't just sitting in that crater. It had started to change. Grow. The thermal readings showed energy levels rising, but there was no light. No movement visible. Just an expanding field of distortion that swallowed sensors like they didn't exist. The few who had gone to investigate the crater hadn't reported back. Drones failed too. Either their feeds cut off instantly, or they came back scrambled with impossible coordinates, like they were moving through multiple places at once. The team had argued at first, maybe it was just a malfunction, maybe a misreading. But deep down they all knew. This was no ordinary artifact. This wasn't some leftover from a lost civilization. This was active. Alive. And whatever it was doing, it wasn't done. One of the scientists, a man named Bren, stood up suddenly from his desk, breathing hard. I think it's learning. That thing, it's absorbing data from everything we send it. Drones, code, sound, motion. It's testing us. Studying us. Someone scoffed. You're saying it's intelligent? Bren looked around the room, then nodded slowly. I don't think we've just found something alien. I think it found us. That was the moment it started again. Not the tremors, something worse. A sound. Not one they could hear with their ears, but something they felt deep in their bones. Like a hum inside their skulls, growing louder with each heartbeat. It wasn't just discomfort. It was like their thoughts were being stretched, pulled thin, scattered. One of the soldiers dropped her rifle. She covered her ears even though there was nothing to hear. Her lips trembled like she was trying to speak, but no words came out. The officer grabbed her shoulder. Stay with me. Focus. The sound faded after a minute. But it left something behind. A kind of silence that didn't feel real. Like the whole planet was waiting for something else. Back at the central screen, the distortion had grown wider. It was moving now, but not fast. It didn't need to. It was creeping across the terrain, dissolving rock and steel without fire or impact. Just vanishing things from reality. They sent one last drone. It hovered in place above the distortion, holding steady. For a few moments, the feed was clear. Then something reached up, something they couldn't see, just a flash of interference and a warping of the image. Then nothing. The feed died and the drone was gone. More silence. Then came the whisper. It didn't come from the speakers or their radios. It came from inside them. A voice, if you could call it that, somewhere between thought and sensation. We see you. Someone in the room screamed. Someone else dropped to the floor, clutching their chest. One of the younger techs burst into tears, muttering nonsense, trying to shake the words out of his head. Bren sat down heavily. His face had gone pale. It's not just watching. It's reaching in. The officer stared at him. How? What does it want? I don't know, he whispered. But it's choosing. They didn't know what he meant then. Not fully. But they soon would. Outside, the landscape had started to shift. At first, they thought it was a mirage. But it wasn't. The ground was rewriting itself. Buildings that once stood in the distance now looked melted, twisted into spirals and loops. Trees changed shape, some stretching into thin, impossibly tall spires, others folding into themselves like crumpled paper. It was like reality had lost its rules. Then the power inside the bunker surged, then failed. Total blackout. The emergency lights flicked back on after a few long seconds. Red glow painted everyone's faces. That's when they heard it again, footsteps outside. Not heavy ones. Soft. Human-like. But no one had gone outside. The officer motioned to the guards. They moved to the hatch, weapons raised. One of them pulled it open slow, careful, ready to close it again at the first sign of trouble. But nothing was there. No wind. No person. Just a long, silent corridor of stone and dirt leading into the dusk. And then, a voice. This time it was real. Spoken. Please, help. The guard stepped out fast, scanning the area. The voice had sounded close. Then they saw him. A man. Barefoot, shivering, clothes torn. His skin was covered in strange markings, thin lines glowing faintly under his skin. He stumbled forward, barely upright. The officer ran to meet him. Who are you? What happened out there? He looked at her and his eyes were different, too wide, too still. It's inside, he whispered. It's already inside. They tried to help him, but he collapsed before they could get him through the door. Medics rushed in. They tried everything. He was breathing barely. But his vitals were strange. No consistency. Like his body was flickering between states, human then something else. The team locked the doors again. That night, no one slept. Whatever was out there had crossed a line. It had touched one of them. And it hadn't needed force to do it. Just time. The officer gathered them all in the briefing room. Her voice was hoarse. We're not facing an invasion. This isn't war, not in any way we understand it. She looked around at their scared, tired faces. This is something older, smarter. And it doesn't want to destroy us. It wants to unravel us. No one argued. They all knew she was right. The next morning, the sky had changed color. It wasn't blue or gray. It wasn't even a sky anymore. It was layers. Like folded glass shifting above them. And behind it, something massive moved, something watching just behind the veil. The distortion field had grown again overnight, covering more ground. Faster now. It wasn't creeping anymore. It was coming. They had hours, maybe less. Inside, the man they had found began to change. Not physically, not at first, but in his mind. He started speaking in patterns, numbers, fragments of code, languages no one recognized. And then he said something that froze them all. You opened the door. They didn't know what he meant. Not yet. But outside, the distortion had started to take shape. It wasn't just a field now. It had a center, a form, and it was moving toward them. Not drifting, not creeping, marching, deliberate. With every step it took, reality bent further. Shapes that didn't belong formed out of thin air, columns of light that screamed, shadows that moved even without a source. People began to panic. Some wanted to run. Others wanted to fight. But deep down they all knew. There was nowhere left to go. It didn't stop marching. Each step brought the thing closer, not just physically but inside their minds. There was no sound from its movements, no thunder of impact, no rumble. Just stillness, growing heavier with every moment. A stillness that filled lungs like cold smoke and made thoughts slip through fingers like water. Inside the outpost, panic turned into silence. No one knew what to say anymore. They just watched. Waited. Dread didn't feel sharp now. It felt hollow. Like they were already too late. The man they'd rescued hadn't moved in hours, but the lines beneath his skin had started to glow brighter. He wasn't asleep. His eyes stayed open, locked on nothing. Sometimes he whispered words that made no sense. Other times he screamed, loud and sudden, then went quiet again. And then he said something that stopped everything. There was a second one. Everyone turned. The officer leaned in. What did you say? He blinked slowly. We saw it. On the edge of the crater. Not part of the first. Not the same. The signal was different. Quieter. Like it didn't want to be seen. No one moved for a long moment. Bren looked at the data logs, scrolling through what little the satellite captured before going dark. His fingers froze. There's something buried near the crater, he said quietly. Smaller. Shielded. I thought it was just debris or a false read. The officer stepped over. How far? Maybe a kilometer from the first impact site. No power spikes, no movement until now. What changed? He hesitated. I think it's waking up too. But slower. Like it was waiting. The officer's eyes narrowed. Waiting for what? He didn't answer. Outside, the marching figure finally stopped. It stood at the edge of the defensive perimeter. It didn't move forward. It didn't speak. It just stood there. But the world around it wasn't still. The atmosphere warped. Light bent inwards. The dirt under its feet shifted color, like it was being rewritten. The air shimmered with tension so thick it made their skin crawl. And then, without warning, every screen in the outpost came alive at once. No command. No input. Just a single image, the stars. But not how they knew them. The constellations were wrong. Unfamiliar. Off by degrees. But it wasn't random. It was a map. A warning. The symbols glowed along the edges. Some blinked. Some pulsed. And one of them, a larger symbol near the center, began to rotate slowly. Then the whisper came again. This time louder. Inside everyone's minds all at once. You are not alone. Some dropped to the floor, gripping their heads. Others cried out, clutching their ears even though the sound wasn't real. But one person, one of the engineers, stood still. Her eyes wide. Her lips parted. I've seen this before, she whispered. They all turned toward her. In the archives. Back home. During the first deep space scans. There were rumors, unconfirmed signals buried in the static, dismissed by command. But they matched this. I remember the pattern. The officer stepped toward her. What kind of signals? She swallowed hard. Distress calls. From human ships. Lost colonies. Ones we thought were destroyed. The silence that followed felt like falling into a void. You're saying this thing, whatever it is, heard them? Bren asked. She nodded. Or maybe, it answered. That's when the second twist landed like a fist to the chest. The comms array, dead for hours, suddenly came online. Static at first. Then a voice. Weak, broken. Human. If anyone's receiving, this is Station 14, we're under attack. It's not just one, they're everywhere. Asterisk asterisk. Then another voice cut in. Different location. Same desperation. We made contact with the second entity, it's not the same. It helped us, it's hiding us, asterisk asterisk. And a third transmission. This one louder, clearer. There are factions, it's not a single intelligence. They're not unified. Some want to use us, others want to warn us, asterisk asterisk. The messages overlapped, layered like a storm of voices screaming across space. Then it cut out. The room fell into stunned silence. Everything had changed. This wasn't a single threat. This was a divided force. Multiple entities with different goals, different methods. Some wanted humanity gone. And others might be trying to help. But how could they tell which was which? The officer turned to Bren. The second object. The buried one. If it's the source of the other signal, can we reach it? He looked at her like she just asked him to touch a black hole. If we go now, maybe. But if that thing out there reacts, then we'll know it sees the other one as a threat. But it could mean suicide. The officer didn't flinch. So could waiting. The team split fast. A recon group prepped to head for the crater, using the underground tunnels. Less chance of being spotted. They moved quickly, each stepped down into the earth feeling like they were dropping into a deeper part of the unknown. Up above, the figure hadn't moved. But something about it had changed. The sky above it cracked, literally split, like a pane of glass flexing under pressure. A fracture ran across the clouds. And behind it, stars shimmered. But not stars from any chart they knew. These were too sharp, too precise. Like something watching through a window. The recon team reached the edge of the crater. Dust still hung in the air, unnaturally still. Their scanners picked up interference immediately. One of them tried to ping the buried object. The signal bounced, but didn't vanish. Then a pulse. Gentle. Low frequency. Like a heartbeat. And with it, warmth. Not temperature. Something else. Something they couldn't explain. One of them stepped forward. The pulse returned. Like a response. Not hostile. And then, a sudden jolt, the ground beneath them shook. But not from the object. From behind. They turned. The marching figure was gone. Vanished. Above them, the crack in the sky widened. And from it, light poured through. But it wasn't sunlight. It was something colder. More artificial. Like a spotlight through layers of reality. The officer's voice came through the comms. We lost visual. What's happening down there? One of the recon members responded, breathless. It moved. The figure's gone. We're at the buried object. Responding. Not hostile. Back in the bunker, panic had risen again. People gathered in silence around the main screen as the map updated. Something was descending through the crack, something larger than the first. No defined shape. Just motion. Volume. Pressure. They weren't just dealing with one entity anymore. This was a convergence. Bren stood up slowly, staring at the data streams. This isn't just about us, he said. It's about all life that's reached beyond its own world. What are you saying? Someone asked. He pointed at the symbols blinking across the star map. This isn't a warning to us. It's a pattern. A test. We're just the next to face it. He looked around the room, his voice quiet but steady. They said we didn't belong in space. He turned back to the screen. But maybe that was never about whether we could survive it. Maybe it was about whether we'd survive them. No one moved. Outside, the crack in the sky split open fully. And through it came something no one could describe. Not a ship. Not a weapon. Something far older. Watching. Waiting. Choosing. And the buried object pulsed again. This time brighter. Stronger. And the recon team disappeared from all sensors. They didn't scream. When the recon team vanished from the sensors, there was no sound. No static. No last words. Just absence. 1 second they were there and the next, nothing. The outpost went completely still. People stared at the screens as if willing them to refresh, hoping it was just a glitch, a brief moment of interference, but deep down they knew better. The way the sky had torn open, the way that light had fallen through like something sentient. It wasn't random. They'd been taken. But not destroyed. That was the strange thing. The logs still showed faint pulses. Organic. Rhythmic. Like heartbeats, not machinery. Like something alive. Bren's voice was thin when he finally spoke. They're not dead. I don't think they're gone either. Not exactly. He didn't sound convinced. He sounded like he was trying to convince himself. The officer didn't blink. Then we get them back. How? I don't know yet. But we do. Outside, the sky had settled into an unnatural calm. The tear above them still hung open like an eye, but it wasn't expanding anymore. It just hovered watching. And then something shifted. The buried object near the crater, it began to rise. Not explode. Not unfold. It simply lifted from the dust like it had been asleep for 1,000 years, and only now remembered what it was. It was unlike anything they'd seen before. Part stone, part metal, but smoother than any human or alien design. It didn't hover using visible thrust. It simply moved, slowly, deliberately, as if pulled upward by unseen threads. A sound came with it, a low hum, almost like a human voice singing far off in the distance. And then it spoke. But not with words. Inside every person at the outpost, something shifted. Not a thought. Not an emotion. A memory. Something they didn't remember living but recognized as their own. A child reaching toward the stars for the first time. A pilot gripping the controls of the first deep space shuttle, heart pounding. A builder watching a habitat module click into place on a Martian plane. Oh, the buried entity wasn't a weapon. It was a key. The officer looked at Bren. It's been here longer than we have. He nodded slowly. Maybe it was waiting for this moment. For us. Or for them to show up. Above them, the light in the sky pulsed. Then, like a thread snapping, it began to descend. Not as a beam but as something solid. Slow. Heavy. It was coming down. The air vibrated. People rushed to the window, to the hatches, to any place they could get a view. And then, the thing in the sky reached the surface. It didn't slam down like a weapon. It touched the ground as if tasting it. A ripple spread out from the impact point, light sweeping across the valley like a sunrise. And then everything stopped. No movement. No sound. Even their thoughts felt frozen. Inside that stillness, something walked out from the light. Not the same shape as the earlier figure. This one was taller. More human. Not in its face or body but in the way it moved. Like it had watched them for a long time. What? It walked toward the outpost slowly. No weapons. No threat. Just silence. The officer and a small group went out to meet it. Not because it was safe but because they knew they had no other choice. The thing stopped 10 meters from them. Its voice wasn't sound. It was a presence in their heads, like a conversation across a dream. You reached too far. The officer stepped forward. Then why let us reach it all? Because reaching is the test. Curiosity births danger. And hope. Most collapse. Few adapt. And which are we? The light around the figure pulsed once. You are not finished. It turned toward the rising structure from the crater. The object now floated above the ground, spinning slowly, casting beams of strange color in all directions. That was not made by us. It is older. The officer frowned. Then who made it? There was a pause. A long one. You did. Silence dropped like a hammer. Bren's voice shook. That's impossible. The being turned its faceless gaze on him. Not you now. You before. The ones you don't remember. You left it for yourselves. The ground trembled again. The floating object stopped spinning. One of its sides opened, not with mechanical parts but with thought. Inside lights flickered. Holograms formed, of Earth, of colonies, of human minds connecting in shared vision. And then it showed them something no one expected. Images of humans, but not as they were now. Taller. Thinner. Different eyes. Strange tools. Standing among stars that didn't match anything in current maps. Humanity had been to the stars before. Long before. And failed. And forgotten. The twist hit like gravity in reverse. Everything they'd believed, about being the first to reach deep space, about breaking new ground, was wrong. They were the second attempt. The buried object wasn't alien. It was a message from their past selves. A warning. And a second chance. Bren stared at the image, lips parting. We forgot, because we had to. The being nodded slowly, the pulse in its body dimming. You collapsed once. But you left the memory behind. Buried. Hidden. Hoping one day you'd find it again. The officer whispered, and now that we have? The sky above began to seal. The tear closing. Now you decide. To become what you were, or what they fear you'll become again. Then it stepped back into the light. And disappeared. The object floated down, gently, like it had finished its task. The moment it touched the earth, the recon team reappeared on the edge of the crater. Alive. Unharmed. Changed. They didn't speak right away. They just stood, looking upward, eyes full of something none of them could explain. One of them finally whispered, "We saw it. Everything. Not just who we were. Who we could be." No one asked what they meant, because deep down they already knew. The stars were watching. Waiting. But not just to stop them. To see if this time humanity was ready. And the final twist? When they checked the systems, the buried object was gone. But not physically. It was now part of their ship. Part of the outpost. Integrated. It had chosen to stay. Not as a guide, but as a memory. Because this time, they weren't going to forget. The silence after the being vanished lingered like a heartbeat too long. No one moved for several moments. The air felt heavy, like everything had changed but gravity hadn't caught up yet. The recon team stood at the edge of the crater, their suits torn in places, their skin dusted with ash, eyes distant. Yet they were alive. And more than that, they were calm. The officer finally took a step toward them. "What happened to you?" One of the recon members, a woman who hadn't spoken much before deployment, met his gaze. "It showed us." Bren stepped beside the officer, voice low. "Showed you what?" She looked up at the sky, now whole again, the tear sealed. "Ourselves." Before. No one needed to press further. The buried object had confirmed what the visitors had hinted at. Humanity hadn't just stumbled into the stars. They were trying again. Maybe not even for the second time. Maybe the third, the fifth. Who knew how many cycles had passed? But this time it was different. This time they remembered. The floating structure had dissolved into thin filaments that threaded themselves through the base, weaving into the walls, the comms, even the data systems. What was once ancient tech now pulsed quietly beneath their own. Not taking over. Just merging. Like a teacher choosing to stay in the classroom. The next few days were slow. Measured. They didn't rush back to Earth. Not yet. First they rebuilt the outpost with more care. Not just for protection but for connection. The architecture started shifting subtly as the new systems integrated. Lights moved without wires. Gravity adjusted itself in rooms depending on mood, tension, even sleep cycles. The strangest part was the dreams. Not nightmares, but memories. People started waking with fragments in their heads. Blue suns. Cities floating over oceans of mist. Music that bent light. Children laughing in places that had no names in any database. All of it felt real. And it was consistent. Like everyone had tapped into a shared library of who humanity had been long ago. Not fiction. Not hallucinations. Memory reaching out from the buried roots of the species. Bren documented everything. His hands trembled sometimes. Not from fear. From awe. "We were so much more than we are now," he whispered one night, staring at his log. "And yet, maybe this version of us is the one that survives." The officer sat beside him. She'd aged in a week, it seemed. Not from time. From weight. Carrying knowledge no one had trained for. "Or maybe," she said quietly, "this version is the bridge. Between what we were and what we need to become." A few days later, Earth responded. The first signals didn't make sense. Systems scrambled. Data rerouted. And then the message came through, crystal clear. *****. We saw it too. Across Earth, similar anomalies had begun. Old satellite arrays reactivated. Deep-sea sensors picked up patterns and currents. Even the moon's dark side registered subtle pulses matching the rhythm of the object. It hadn't just awakened on one planet. It had awakened across all of human space. Some called it destiny. Others called it a warning. But for most, it became a beginning. Missions were launched not just to explore but to reconnect with what had been lost. Old ruins on Mars now glowed faintly. Structures long thought to be natural formations shifted under scanners, revealing design. Everywhere they looked, traces emerged. And with each discovery, humanity grew quieter. More thoughtful. Less certain. Because it wasn't just a celebration of achievement. It was a reminder, they'd come close to extinction before. Close enough to erase entire histories. But something, or someone, had planned for that. Left pieces behind. Seeds. Triggers. So that when the time was right, when humanity was fragile enough to listen, they'd hear the echo. The recon team never returned to Earth. They chose to stay on the outpost, now nicknamed Threshold. It wasn't just a station anymore. It had become a living archive, constantly updating, revealing more of the past as it sensed readiness. The officer stayed too. She sent recordings home. Stories. Warnings. Hopes. Not all of them were easy to hear. "We're not who we thought we were. But that doesn't mean we were wrong. We belong out here. We always did. We just forgot how to be the kind of people who could survive it." Bren taught classes now. To new arrivals. Scientists. Pilots. Poets. He read from the logs, but more than that, he asked questions. What does it mean to start over? If we had one more chance, what would we build differently? People answered with stories. Ideas. Dreams. The most common answer? We'd remember. Years passed. Threshold grew. Not into a city. Not into a military outpost. Into something new. A place where technology and memory lived together. Where humans didn't just explore space but healed in it. One day the light returned. Not from above. From within. The object, the key, flared once, then dimmed. And in its glow, a new message emerged. Not a warning. Not a test. An invitation. Coordinates. Far beyond the edge of mapped space. Beyond the reach of current drives. But not beyond hope. The officer stood on the observation deck that evening, watching stars she didn't know the names of. Bren stood beside her. You think we're ready? She asked. He didn't smile. He just breathed deep. No. But I think we're willing. The next mission launched quietly. No fanfare. No broadcasts. Just a small ship, fitted with what the object had left behind. A ship called Memory. As it drifted into the dark, leaving behind the known, the final message echoed across every frequency, every channel, every corner of human space. ****. They said we didn't belong in space. We disagreed. And now we remember why. ****.